Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to be going over the dark side of life. So, what I want to do with this is basically go over all the terrible things that happen to us in life as we go through it, but at the same time try to extract some reasoning out of these negative things and also the silver linings behind them, because I think that's also pretty important and pretty interesting if you kind of look at it that way, right? Like, what is there to be gained from like all this darkness? In my last video, I talked about entering a dark world, and so that's not what I'm referring to this time. I'm just referring to all the cruel and unfair things that happen to us from time to time, right? So starting off, I'm gonna go over inequalities and unfairness. So, as we all know, as we are aware of things that happen on the other side of the world, or just different neighborhoods, different nations, countries, perspectives, point of views. This digital world has allowed us to peer into those different lives, less privileged ones, right? And even people, and it doesn't even have to be through the digital world. I think it just exposes more of it out there. But with people, even within your circle, you might know of some people who are going through something really tough, or you might have heard of an unfortunate situation in your city, wherever you live. There's plenty of crappy things that happen on a day-to-day basis, everywhere, anywhere, right? And some things are way more heinous and evil than others, and it sometimes life just seems really unfair. There's people who are brought up in situations where they have no control over much of their life, and they just kind of get dragged through the mud. And maybe you'll have never met that person, but that exists out there somewhere, right? They don't really get much love. They don't get much of a healthy environment, and so they're just brought up in this really dark place, and then they end up being criminals, and then they end up dying from it, right? So that's pretty unfair. And even with things that happen within your life, you've experienced unfairness, things that happen, you didn't get your way, and yeah, it sucks, but as is life, right? Sometimes we all go through some aspect of this, and some people go through it way worse. Some people never get a chance, and when you look at life that way, it just really starts to suck. But I think it's an interesting concept. This is something that I've just really thought about, but I feel like life requires negativity in order to allow for positivity to exist, right? Like, without, if we lived in a world where nothing could go wrong, right? Everyone would always get their way. There would be no pain and suffering. There would be no corruption. Like, all that stuff doesn't exist. You would think of that as a heaven, right? That's what's described in biblical texts and whatnot. And you think to yourself, hey, that sounds really great. But the issue with that is, in a world where there is no consequences, where there is no danger, and everyone is just sheltered, I think it is it's very hard to be grateful, right? Uh, especially especially if you were sheltered your whole life, like, you just you never knew the concept of suffering. And it doesn't really create any challenges either, right? If there is no consequence to going up to a bear in the middle of the woods, or going out into the woods unprepared, you didn't bring enough food and supplies, so you know, but you can't die because in this perfect world it won't allow you to. So there's just no consequences to any actions. And I feel like that would just get really boring. There's no challenge, there's no touch the stove moment of, hey, don't do that again. It's just all bliss. And I just think that kind of world would be very, very mundane and boring. And what would you extract out of that? You know, you might know that your family will never die, and you'll all just be singing "Kumbaya" all the time and being happy. But there's no. I kind of want to use the word fun, but that doesn't seem like the right word. But I guess there is no fun to that. Where's the challenge? Where's anything? And the gratefulness, I think, stems from knowing that there is suffering, that there are people out there who are in far worse situations than you are, and so you are grateful for that. And I don't think gratefulness would exist without the the negative stuff. I think you have to. I think life does require negativity in order to allow for positivity. As shitty as that sounds, that's kind of how it is, right? I mean, I know everyone is thinking. Well, not everyone, but there are people out there who believe in these biblical afterlives of, you're in a nirvana where you'll meet your family and everything will be all good and dandy. But I mean, for an eternity, you're just gonna live without any challenge and just in eternal bliss. If you have any if if the human feelings and emotions carry on over to this nirvana, boredom will take place. Okay, unless boredom doesn't exist in heaven, unless you're all just mindless drones where you're happy and you're okay with just being happy with no threat, no challenge, none of that, and somehow you don't get bored, then okay, maybe I don't understand heaven. But if your implications of heaven is anything like that, where you're basically everyone here on Earth just gets transferred to this heaven-like place, if you're on good behavior, then you would still exhibit all those feelings of boredom and blah blah blah, and that would carry over because there's no threat, right? Where would the threat be? I guess the threat would be knowing that a hell exists and that you're not in it, and I guess you could be grateful for that. But well, I mean, what would you do all day? I mean, would you and your family just sit around and just talk? I mean, what, like, you can't go, if you go hunting or camping, it wouldn't be the same. Again, there's no threat. You're not going to get mauled by a bear. So my ideal version of heaven, I think, would be kind of like there are threats, but I think things are a bit more forgiving. I think life would be more forgiving. So a good version of heaven in my mind. Okay, I'm just making this up. Just ideal, right? Ideal conditions for me in this heaven-like place. All previous family members and everyone that you once loved are there, and there's really no hell. Okay, like there's maybe a place that for really evil people, they spend some time there, but it's not for an eternity. Anyways, I'm not gonna get into that. But so in this heaven space, it's very close, very similar to Earth, but there's no corruption that exists like to the extent of like what exists today, right? Like maybe there's some levels of it, but there's no governing bodies to really have to worry about. So, you know, I don't know. I don't know how to design the perfect heaven, but in my mind, it would be if we do take if my family and I go out camping out in the woods, okay, in this heaven-like place, if we end up dying and getting mauled, we would just reset back to, you know, the starting point in heaven, whatever that is, the pearly gates again, and we would just start over and be like, oh, okay, that was a pretty horrific experience. We just won't do that again, type thing. Like dangers still lie there. There's still consequences, but it's a bit more forgiving in that you all just kind of get reset back to the starting point, kind of like a video game, where there's no life-altering consequences. There's no real extreme suffering or pain for very long, right? You do touch the stove in heaven, it burns, it sucks, but it's not going to permanently scar you. It's not going to alter your life. I mean, it's going to hurt. It should hurt, so that way you don't do it again, and you're a bit more cautious. And again, there's that gratitude, there's that fear of consequence, but there's no permanent consequences to certain things. But then again, like, I just feel like after enough time goes by, it would just kind of get boring. Even in that ideal state that I described of heaven. I don't know. It wouldn't really do it for me, I guess. Like, and some of you might think of it and be like, "Wow, you're just really ungrateful." But really, just think about the implications of living in a place like that. Like, same old, same old. And eventually, you would have explored everything there is to do until, like if you have an eternity to spend in this place, then there's only so many things you can do before you just kind of start to get bored and say like, "Oh, done that." I mean, sure, I'm grateful for not being somewhere else, I guess, but I don't know. There's just got to be enough consequences there in order to satisfy the positives, I guess. That's just the way I'm looking at it. I'm just looking at it from like a balance of things, not necessarily like I want there to be bad because I just want there to be bad. Like there's a reason, right? Just like when you play a video game, I mean, you've got to have consequences as well, right? Otherwise, you just get bored. So what they've done is they design checkpoints. So okay, you die, you just start back here. There's a consequence, and that is death because you messed up. You didn't play right, so you died. So the consequence is starting back over to a different point. That's fair, but it creates challenge. If you didn't have that, if you could just breeze through any game, like not have to worry about the consequences of dying, and it's all just positive bliss, wouldn't that get boring? Right? And that's what I'm saying is like there has to be a challenge. We as humans have to be challenged. And again, if we transcend into some different form that doesn't care about boredom, maybe that doesn't exist, or I don't know how that would work, but okay, I guess that solves that issue. But if we're assuming that we are the same person here on Earth, just transforming into a different form, we would still exhibit the same types of feelings that would cause boredom and and things like that. So again, we would have to have that challenge. But anyways, interesting thought experiment of you got to have the negative to allow for positive, the yin and the yang. It's all got to be there, and I think that's what makes life interesting, right? You look at the next person and be like, okay, they're living life. They've got a whole different set of problems than me, and then that lets you be grateful for the things you do have and the problems that you don't have to deal with. So, just an interesting take on things, I guess. The next subject on this would be death of loved ones, right? This is another dark side of life. I mean, everyone's got their time limit on this planet, and it expires at some point. And when that happens, we have to just kind of deal with it. We deal with it in all sorts of different ways. I've gone over the ways that people typically cope, in previous videos, so I'm not going to really dive into that a whole lot. But this is just another dark aspect of life. Knowing that there's a time limit, at least if you're consciously thinking about it, you should start to spend more time with these people, and then you won't take for granted all the times that you have spent with each other. You know, those moments are cherished because it's like, okay, I only have maybe 20, 30, 40, whatever years with this person or thing. If it's an animal that you love, you might only have a few more years with it, right? Like my English bulldog, she'll be turning 1 here soon, and I'm gonna assume she's probably got another 6, 7 years to go to live before she is no longer with me. And I know that she doesn't, but I know that, and that kind of, again, it creates gratefulness. It allows you to cherish the moments that you have with something. If it wasn't for that time limit, if she could live on forever, I could live on forever, then that concept would kind of just fall apart, right? Don't you think? It's kind of a sad, shitty way to look at things, but you kind of have to have these parameters set in place in order for you to really appreciate something, right? Again, if there was no death, no suffering, I think we would just take things for granted way too much. We already do as a species. You know, I take things for granted all the time. Just day-to-day things that I have: electricity, water, food, the access to food, community. You know, all these things that I take for granted on a day-to-day basis. If you told me that I now no longer have to worry about dying, everyone around me that I love no longer has to worry about dying or suffering, it's the gratefulness would kind of start to disappear a little bit. I probably wouldn't be spending one day out of the week visiting my parents like I do now. I would be like, oh, well, they'll live forever, so, you know, what if I skip a week or two? You know, I'll see them at some point. They're not going anywhere, right? They're not getting any older. But because I know that my time with my parents is limited, I make it a point to visit every week. You know, I don't think I've missed. Well, there's been a few weeks here and there where I've missed a visit, but I'm pretty damn good about it. I mean, I would say like 99% of the time I'm there, right? And I just think our perception, our concept of things regarding that will start to go away because there is no pressing, there's no pressure to do so, right? So just an interesting concept there, I think. And the next thing is that life is unforgivable. It doesn't care about your feelings or what you've been through. It's not like you go through so much negative stuff that life's all of a sudden like, okay, well, we'll ease off on you a little bit. We'll go easy on you. That's not how that works. It doesn't really care. It doesn't matter what you've been through, and you can go through a string of really shitty luck just over and over and over again, and life just keeps pushing you down. And knowing it, there's nothing there that is gonna try to remedy that and make that better. Like, nature is just unforgivable. And this is where it's important to distinguish that and know that, okay, so life isn't fair. Random things can just happen. Someone that you love could just get killed tomorrow, right? That's not fair. That's unforgivable. And it doesn't care about your feelings. But the thing that does care about your feelings are the people that you love, that love you. They care, right? Life might not care. Nature and things may not care. Might be super unforgiving, but we as people have created the concept of caring. That's where the human side brings that in, and that's where the warmth and the love really comes into play, is humans. We create that, and that's why I think it's super important to be social and lean into your fellow humans, because they're the one thing, they're the one variable that can actually show care and kindness in a world that is super unforgiving. And I don't think enough people really think about it like that because, as antisocial as you may be, there is no doubt that human company is very much appreciated from time to time, or the company of other living things, right? Dogs are amazing. I mean, they're super empathetic creatures that love you unconditionally, no matter what, right? You could have the shittiest day ever, come home and they'll love you. You could leave for 10 minutes, come back and they'll act like you've been gone for months every time. It's something that you can't replicate with something that isn't real, that isn't alive. That's just a thing. So it's important to lean into those things because life doesn't care. We know that. It's unforgiving. Some people it's just relentless. It's just unrelenting shitty luck of just crappy thing after crappy thing. And that's awful. It's awful, but that's how it goes sometimes. So, lean into your fellow person. So, the other side of this is when you can't lean into your fellow person. There are people who are just the product of their circumstances. And these people will never have a chance to lean into anyone. They don't have a support. They don't have the proper support system to get them out of a certain situation. So, for example, you could have someone grow up in an environment like today where they're born into a situation where their parents never really knew how to parent correctly, right? And which not a lot of people just jump in and know exactly how to develop another human being, one of their own, their own kid into an adult properly. Like they learn along the way. So there's some accidents that happen, but let's just say this person is born into a family that really doesn't have a good handle on their own life. So, and they thought maybe they were ready to have a kid, and but they weren't as ready as they thought because they weren't equipped with the correct amount of knowledge to protect this child from certain issues. What I mean by that is they they get their kid to grow up onto eating fast food, right? And that's been the whole family's diet. It's their parents' diet, and now it's their child's diet because their child doesn't really have a choice. That's what the parents choose to eat on a day-to-day basis. Fast food places that are not healthy. They're just convenient. They're cheap because that's what the family can afford. So that's what they choose to eat. Well, we all know the issues of that can lead to being overweight and causing obesity, and then that causes further health issues because they're not consuming the correct type of nutrients, and their macros are all out of whack, right? Way too many carbs, way too many sugars, way too much sodium, right? Not the right brain food to help develop their kid correctly. When their kid is hooked on that stuff, that's their way of life. That's what they know. That's what was taught to them, and to get them out of that way of thinking is hard unless someone comes along or something like a book of knowledge comes along or some sort of advice is sprinkled into them, and they realize, oh, this way of life isn't really ideal for my health. Well, let's pretend that kid never had that opportunity, and this is a very real example, by the way. And they never also really got a chance to socialize in school. Like they're going up through the grades, and then some issues happen, and they end up being homeschooled. So, all right, they're about, I don't know, middle schoolish, and then they become homeschooled, and so now they're sheltered from from the social aspect of things, which is a very important part of human development, is to socialize. You got to get your kids out there, for the full extent of the schooling program, right? The elementary, the middle school, and the high school, the whole way up, right? 12 years, 13 years, whatever it is. That's really good for them because that gets them to socialize. And then, but they miss out on that. There's years where they're just being homeschooled. It's just, whether it's a product of because of the circumstances that they are getting bullied a lot, or they're just having social anxieties, or they're having a hard time comprehending what the teachers are trying to explain to them, or maybe there's just really bad teachers, and whatever. There's a multitude of reasons why this kid cannot succeed through the current schooling program, right? But that never gets diagnosed. That never gets taken quite seriously. In the correct way, and the correct way to do that would be to diagnose what's going on. Instead, the solution is to homeschool them. So they get homeschooled, and they miss out on a very crucial part of development, and that is the social aspect, right? So they miss out on that. And they now have this eating disorder, and because they've never really eaten healthy to begin with, there's plenty of evidence that suggests that eating unhealthy goes beyond the physical. It's a mental issue that it starts to create, and so it diminishes their confidence, and they start to just feel bad about themselves, because I think that's just naturally what the brain does when it's lacking in good nutrients, and then it messes up with your gut bacteria, and that's a whole thing that I can get into, but I'm not going to get into it with this video. But anyways, so they're not taking in proper nutrients because that's what they know, that's what they've been taught by their parents. It causes issues with their mental state, and then this person gets put back into school for whatever reasons, right? They took a couple of years off homeschool, and now they're back with society. Well, now this person is still struggling in school, barely gets a diploma, and now they're off into the world. They're still living with mom and dad. They are now 18. Hasn't had a job up to this point. They've just been having a really hard time socializing to begin with, and again, that could have stemmed from bullying. That could have stemmed from just something that could have been diagnosed earlier, such as social anxieties, right? Like severe social anxieties, and then the fact that they were homeschooled for a few years and they missed out on some of it. That didn't help. Their parents didn't really push a whole lot of socializing as much as they could have, or in the right direction, because they didn't know that this could have been an issue. Well, this all snowballs into what they become now, and so this is another 2 years in the future, and they still don't have a job. They're still living with mom and dad, and they're getting more and more depressed because they're not. At this point they've missed so much of the socializing aspect. They've missed out on a job, or any sort of form of job for responsibility, which is a huge deal for character development and for the human development. And they've missed out on that, and their parents didn't really encourage it. They didn't really push it as much. They weren't really nudging them in the right direction, and all this parenting, which you could call bad, but you could also call ignorant, whatever you want to call it, has just manifested this kid's life into misery. Again, they're just a product of their circumstances. They had no control over this. This is the life that they were given, and they don't really know any better. There was no one there to help coach them through this and say, hey, socializing is really important. I get you have anxiety. Let's try to work through this. Here's some steps that we can do to resolve this, so that way you can have the courage to then go through the interview process, get a job, and taking in responsibility and learning how to budget your money and start to be more independent. And so they've missed out on all this, and even now they're not they're still missing out on it. They have not taken that leap yet. So now this person is going to therapy because they think there's something wrong with them. That why I'm having a really hard time socializing. They say to their therapist, and so all this damage for 20 years of their life, of not eating right for one, which I don't know if the therapist is going to diagnose that. I don't really. And the other thing is this therapist even a good one? I mean, there's plenty of quack therapists out there that don't really know what they're talking about or just can't give solid advice, shouldn't be a therapist, but they are one. So this person could have been given a therapist that also doesn't know any better. You can call them ignorant or just plain awful. Whatever labels you want to use. But this therapist is not ideal for this person either. So this kid, has developed into a very antisocial, very anxiety-ridden, unhealthy person, and they're going to have a very hard time adjusting to real life, really. I mean, they've been sheltered. Their parents have allowed them to stay at their place. Of course, they're not going to kick them out. And, it had everything to do with just circumstance. This kid had no choice in any of it. And this kind of example is real, and this kind of thing happens everywhere. Like, what fair chance do some people have? Right? Not everyone has the same starting place, right? Very little people do. You're hardly going to meet someone who had the same sort of upbringing as you, same sort of privileges, whatnot. So we all have different starting places. We need to recognize that. Okay. The other thing we need to recognize is that some people don't even have a chance. Not even a chance. A lot of people think that, oh, you can just get out of your rut if you just do this, or this person really dug themselves a hole, and some people do, don't get me wrong, but you also have to look at it from the human side and see, did this person even have a chance? Were they even given any circumstance to have better themselves? Have they been given any chance for someone or something to come along and show them a different way of life? Because maybe the only way of life they know is crime, or not even crime, but just blatant ignorance, right? Just like in the example I gave you with the parents, parents didn't really know any better. They were living off of fast food every day. They taught their kid that. Now their kid has all these issues, and these issues have snowballed, and now it's very hard to reverse a lot of the damage. And now this kid is behind a lot of their peers, and they just didn't know any better. They don't know how to get help. They know there's an issue with themselves, but they don't know how to get help. This is why they're seeking help with a therapist, because they're like, hey, what's wrong with me? It's like, well, there's a lot to unpack here, right? So life is not fair. It just is not. You can't. Some people cannot get out of their situations that they're in. It's just not possible. I used to believe that anyone can get out of their situation and be whatever they want to be, but some people, unfortunately, they don't get that chance. I've seen it. I've heard so many stories as someone who's managed hundreds of people. I would know. I've heard stories, and it's very, very sad. So I think it's important to recognize that the next time you decide to think about someone is really try to understand where they're coming from. And again, I'm not trying to give everyone this, oh, everyone should get a all the chances in the world to prove themselves different, or sympathy cards for everyone. Not everyone deserves that, but I'm just saying, whenever something happens, I think it's important to at least assess who they are as a person and what they've been through. That will give you a very good indication as how they got to where they are today, right? It's all about their history. And so, again, another example would be someone who grows up later to be a psychopath. Well, you again peel back their history. You can't feel bad. I mean, you can feel bad to a certain extent as to how that person turned up, but did they ever really have a chance? You know, like people like Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy, like these were people who were kind of out of the gate, were just a bit not there, all there. And then you mix that with negligence of parenting and or an absence of parenting. They didn't have there's just no guidance. And what do you get? You get a psychopath, basically, right? And to some extent, you can have some sympathy towards them, but they are just a product of their environment. Were they even given a chance? Where was it always destined to be that outcome, right? Like, and yeah, a lot of the times I feel like there's that's just how it was meant to be, and it's unfortunate. But I think it's important to recognize that, and not and pretend like everyone has an equal chance at not being a psychopath, or like some people are born right out of the gate with mental issues, and whether that was their parents' fault for previous drug addictions and abuse, or that was just nature's roll of the dice. That kid wasn't given a fair chance, right? But I think we can all still try to, with what we have, what we know, what we're given, just live the best life that you can. And for those of you that are living a relatively good life, I would take these examples of people who never got the chance at a good life or even relatively close to one, because there's even worse stories out there. Take it as, just be grateful. Again, in order for your life to have gratefulness and positivity, you have to look at other people's lives who didn't have that to gain that gratitude and positivity. So you have to use other people's examples and unfairness and suffering to gather any positivity out of it for yourself. And I know that sounds selfish, and it sort of is a selfish mindset, but I think it also humbles you and brings you down to earth a little bit more when you realize, hey, my life is really not that bad in comparison, right? There's someone else who is always going to have it a little bit worse than me. Some people who are never going to be given the opportunities that I'll ever even be given, right? I'm not bound to anything. I'm not a slave to the machine. Like, I have the freedom to be able to expand and grow my knowledge from what I know, and create these things and establish these relationships and have a pretty steady life for the most part. Just take the positives that you can and roll with it, right? That's all you really can do. I think that's basically all I had for this one. Just some interesting concepts there, and maybe you look at things a little differently now going into things. But yeah, some food for thought. Anyways, thanks everyone, and have a great day.